To that, good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're going to get started this morning with the race for the White House. We are now closer to a likely rematch this fall in the general election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump.
NBC News projects former President Trump is the winner in the Michigan Republican primary. He defeated his lone remaining rival, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, by more than 40 points. Mr. Trump won a portion of the delegates as he inches closer to the party's nomination. The majority of that state's delegates will actually be handed out this weekend at a state party convention. Mr. Trump called into a GOP watch party last night in Grand Rapids, addressing supporters.
We have a very simple task. We have to win on November 5th, and we're going to win big, and it's going to be like nothing that anybody has ever seen. We have the worst president in the history of our country, the most incompetent and the most corrupt president, and we can't let this continue.
On the Democratic side, President Biden did win the Michigan primary by a wide margin, but more than 100,000 voters cast their ballots for uncommitted. For many, that was their way of protesting the president's response to the Israel-Hamas war. NBC News correspondent Von Hilliard joins us now with the very latest on all this. So let's start with former President Trump's win in Michigan last night. So Nikki Haley has previously said her vote share indicates problems for Trump.
Right.
Is that still the case now?
Right. Look, when you're talking about a Republican primary, a 40-point win is devastating. Nikki Haley got annihilated in this Republican primary. At the same time, she has made the case that she is sticking in this race to give voters, Republican voters around the country, the opportunity to vote for somebody that is not Donald Trump. And she continues to sound the alarm that, look, 26% of Republican voters said that they don't want Donald Trump to be their nominee, suggesting repeatedly that Donald Trump cannot win in November, and this is a testament and evidence of that. Now, we expect Nikki Haley to move forward through this process here, but the concern for Republicans is not only is she chipping away from independents, essentially helping Democrats make the case against Donald Trump, but also even conservatives who voted for Joe Biden in 2020. We're talking about in Michigan, right? A state that had a very narrow election win for Joe Biden. So for Donald Trump, having Nikki Haley in the race is not advantageous to him and his campaign at all.
Let's talk about the Democratic side, President Biden. So we just had up on our screen a moment ago here, 13.2% of that vote went to that uncommitted part. President Biden did win, but what do you think that says about the fact that there was that significant number of a result? And again, this is over kind of a protest grassroots effort over his handling of the Israel-Hamas war.
Right, Savannah. This is kind of a similar conversation to the one happening on the Republican side. The question was how many folks were going to come out and actually select uncommitted instead of selecting Joe Biden. You had more than 100,000 come out and do just that. Of course, Michigan, with a major Arab American population who has expressed outrage about the Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza, and yet you saw Joe Biden still perform well. I think important context is back in 2012, when Barack Obama was running for re-election uncontested, that 11% of Michigan Democrats then also selected uncommitted. So this 14% is not that much higher. At the same time, when you're talking about a major swing state like Michigan, every thousands of voter counts. And when you're talking about 100,000 voters actively going to the polls to select uncommitted, of course it's a concern for the Democrats.
Let's look ahead. We do have a few contests coming up this weekend before Super Tuesday next week. I can't find a single place where Nikki Haley is expected to win. So what is next for her campaign? What does the road look like?
Nikki Haley can't identify a state. Her campaign hasn't attempted to identify a state that they think that she can win. On Saturday, you have Idaho, Michigan, Missouri voters that are going to be taking part in selecting their delegates to the Republican convention this July here. But when you're looking at the map on next Tuesday, March 5th, that is what is called the Super Tuesday. More than a dozen states are going to have their Republican voters go to the polls, and that is going to be a decisive moment. Nikki Haley has said she will look at the future of her candidacy after that, but I think the context is between now and March 19th, you have 24 states voting, and you said it, Joe, polling does not look good for her anywhere here. In real time, voters are voting by mail and early voting in all 24 of those states already.
All right, Von Hilliard, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Yeah, great to have you on set with us. Well, now the latest crisis on Capitol Hill, where this morning Congress is running out of time to keep the government open again. Senators in both parties say they will likely need to pass another short-term funding bill to prevent a partial shutdown this weekend. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles has the latest from Washington.
Hey, Joe, good morning. And we are once again staring down the barrel of a possible government shutdown. It's set to take place this Friday. It is a little different than the shutdowns we've dealt with in the past in that this would only be a partial government shutdown, about a third of the government. It would impact departments like Veterans Affairs, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Transportation Department. But then a week later, there would be the possibility of the entire federal government shutting down. Now, lawmakers met at the White House yesterday. This was the top congressional leaders, the Senate Majority Leader, Minority Leader, and of course the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader in the House. While they did talk about the shutdown, a lot of the focus of their discussion was around that aid package that's designed to provide aid to both Ukraine and Israel. Now, both sides have said that they do not want a shutdown. They're going to do everything they possibly can to avoid a shutdown. And so that once again enters in the real possibility that they will pass some sort of a short-term spending deal to allow the talks to continue past the deadline. In fact, the Speaker of the House floating the new dates of March 8th and March 22nd as part of that two-tiered plan to fund the government. Still an open question, though, as to whether or not that is going to happen. Lawmakers will return to Washington today. The Senate has already been in session. The House will return today. And, of course, against the backdrop of all of this, while they are still working to attempt to try to find a way through when it comes to funding the government, Hunter Biden, the president's son, will appear on Capitol Hill today for his closed-door deposition as the impeachment inquiry into President Biden continues. So it is going to be a very busy couple of days on Capitol Hill. Joe?
All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you so much. As Ryan mentioned, Hunter Biden is set to testify today in a closed-door deposition. It's part of the House GOP impeachment inquiry into his father.
Yeah, the deposition comes after Hunter's legal team initially refused House Republican subpoena for a private deposition, saying that he would only testify in public so his words could not be selectively leaked or manipulated. You might remember in January, Hunter and his attorney made a surprise appearance sitting in the audience at a House Oversight Committee meeting to vote on whether to hold him in contempt for refusing to appear before that same committee. The committee initially delayed that contempt vote before ultimately abandoning it. So how did we finally end up here?
Let's bring in NBC News senior investigative producer Sarah Fitzpatrick, who will help us sort it all out. Sarah, good to have you with us. So today's deposition, it's really over a year in the making. How did the House GOP and Hunter Biden finally reach a deal after all this drama we've seen play out to have them testify and to do it behind closed doors?
You're right. It's been a very, very long road. But ultimately, the stakes for both sides just became way too high. For House Republicans, they've made huge allegations. They've spent so much time, so many resources, and they're facing criticism internally and externally that they haven't produced clear evidence of a crime yet. For Hunter, he's facing serious charges in two separate cases, criminal cases related to taxes and the purchase of a gun. And those federal judges would not look favorably at him defying a subpoena and being held in contempt of Congress. It's just too risky, and so they made the choice to sit down.
So today's deposition comes after a string of some major setbacks for Republicans who have been pushing this inquiry. So last week, that former FBI informant who Republicans had used to help to justify this probe was arrested and accused of making up a lot of the stories that he had shared about the Biden family. That informant has pleaded not guilty. But tell us, what can we expect today, and what do Republicans hope to get out of Hunter Biden?
We're going to hear, and of course, we're not going to get the transcript for several days, but what will happen in this closed-door deposition will be Hunter Biden emphatically pushing back, talking directly to those members of Congress for the first time about the allegations that have been following him for years. He's going to acknowledge that he made, quote, mistakes, and he's going to talk about the role of his addiction in making those mistakes. But he's also very critically going to insist that his father, Joe Biden, had nothing to do with his businesses and did not benefit from them financially or otherwise. Republicans are going to focus on what they view as inconsistencies in prior witness statements, and they're going to drill down on phrasing in emails and other contemporaneous correspondence to try to get Hunter to acknowledge what they view as his selling of influence. Whether or not they're successful in that, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, realistically, how much further do you think Republicans can push this impeachment inquiry?
I think the answer is not much. While staffers insist that there are still more investigative steps ahead, more interviews, more subpoenas, they've told us that they are aiming for a report on their investigation to be complete by the spring. But we'll have to see if they stick to that timeline. Savannah?
Talking about subpoenas, I mean, James Comer and Jim Jordan subpoenaed Attorney General Merrick Garland for records yesterday. What more should we know about that?
This is kind of an escalation in the kind of back and forth between the Hill and DOJ. House Republicans are looking for the underlying tapes, the tapes of the interview between the special counsel and President Joe Biden, because they want to see if those memory lapses, which the special counsel cited as kind of a key reason why they chose not to charge the president, if those memory lapses are kind of simple mistakes or whether or not they suggest something that's a real underlying problem about his memory or his competency, and whether or not that's an issue for the American people come November.
All right. Sarah Fitzpatrick, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Now let's go to Alabama, where lawmakers are making a push to protect IVF treatments after several of the state's biggest clinics have paused services. It's the latest fallout from the Alabama Supreme Court's ruling that said frozen embryos are children. Here's NBC News correspondent Kathy Park with more.
The backlash to the Alabama IVF ruling was swift, but this week, state lawmakers began moving toward preserving IVF treatments.
Alabama moving one step closer to preserving access to in vitro fertilization.
Relating to in vitro fertilization is referred to the Committee on Health Care.
With new bills introduced by Republicans in the state Senate designed to protect IVF.
We work to foster culture of life, and I anticipate having a bill on my desk very shortly.
Alabama Democrats introduced a similar bill in the House last week following the state Supreme Court's controversial ruling finding embryos are children. The ruling upending IVF procedures.
Every one of the women here has their families have invested emotion, time, and a ton of money.
The Biden administration's top health official, Javier Becerra, in Birmingham, meeting with patients and providers. Hannah Miles has been trying to have a baby for 3 years.
This is not an acceptable way to treat someone or families that are going through something so hard. This isn't a political talking point.
She was weeks away from a scheduled embryo transfer when the ruling came down.
It's like you already feel like you're being held hostage by IVF because it's my whole life. Now we're being held hostage by this ruling.
Hannah's clinic has paused new IVF treatments, but for now, hers is moving forward.
Having a child for you is priceless.
Yes. Yep. You do everything that you can. Because what other choice do you have?
Our thanks to Kathy Park for that report. Well, today, hundreds of Alabama IVF patients and other families plan to rally at the State House. They're hoping to send a message directly to lawmakers.
Turning now to the extreme weather sweeping across the country. In Texas, the governor has issued a disaster declaration with at least 6 wildfires torching parts of the panhandle. The fires cover thousands of acres, forcing evacuations, including at Pantex. That's the country's main nuclear weapons assembly plant. On top of that, thousands in Texas are waking up without power this morning. In Illinois, severe storms produced multiple tornadoes across the state, causing damage to several areas, including Chicago. Some areas even got hit with hail the size of golf balls. And blizzard conditions in North Dakota force residents to break out their snow shovels. Some spots are seeing up to 10 inches of snow, with winds reaching nearly 60 miles an hour.
Let's bring in meteorologist Angie Lassman.
She's tracking the weather all across the country. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. It's been a wild 24 hours of weather in a lot of spots across the country. We still, of course, are dealing with that severe threat. Let's focus on that first, because we do still have some of these tornado watches that are going to remain in effect at least until mid-morning as this line of really strong storms continues marching across portions of the Tennessee and Ohio valleys. That's where we see the really robust thunderstorm, plenty of lightning associated with that, and you notice all of these thunderstorm warnings that are in effect across portions of Kentucky. And this is something that we'll watch at least, like I said, through mid-morning, potentially even later into the morning hours and into early afternoon. We could still be dealing with some of these stronger storms. This is the system that's really the culprit of this kind of weather whiplash that we're seeing across this region over the next 48 hours. It is going to bring kind of a messy commute to folks up and down the I-95 corridor, especially as we get into this evening's commute. It'll be mostly rain, some snow into part of the interior areas of the Northeast and New England, but it's mostly going to be that heavy rain. We likely are going to see this again impacting folks as they try to head home later today. Here's the area, though, that we could see some of the stronger storms. The threat for severe weather much lower into the afternoon hours today than it was, say, yesterday across parts of the Midwest, but it's not zero. So Burlington down through Scranton, Pittsburgh, and down as far south as Knoxville could see some of those stronger storms develop. We're talking some hail, maybe some strong wind wind gusts. The hail threat is fairly low. An isolated tornado, can't rule it out, but that's also fairly low. I would say that the strong wind gusts, 50, 60 miles per hour, are what we're more on tap for. As far as rain is concerned, 1 to 2 inches is going to be some of the higher amounts that we'll see in some of the interior areas, like I mentioned, of the Northeast. Could pick up 1 inch or 2 of snow. Nothing too impressive, but we will see quite impressive winds. We've got 135 million people under these wind alerts. It stretches from parts of the southern plains up into the Northeast. Still includes parts of the Midwest as well, Michigan, Ohio. And look at these wind speeds, up to 43 miles per hour in places like Chicago today, 39 miles per hour in New York, mid-40s for folks in Washington, D.C., so I wouldn't be surprised if we still see some down power lines, maybe some down trees. And guys, behind this system, really cold air working in. It's going to be a bit of a doozy for people that maybe had their shorts and T-shirts on yesterday in places like Chicago, where it was mid-70s. Today, 27 degrees for their high there.
It's a little dose of reality. It's February.
Dose of reality, indeed.
Thanks, Angie.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.